The rain didn't just fall on Portland that Tuesday, it waged war. For Imogen Carroway huddled under the flickering neon sign of the Corner Spoon Diner, each icy drop felt like a tiny hammer against her resolve. At 28, her life was a relentless cycle of lukewarm, coffee-aching feet and a dream that seemed to shrink with every rent check she wrote. She was just a waitress, another face in the crowd. But on this night, as a man stood shivering across the street, defeated by the storm, she made a small choice. She opened her cheap, flimsy umbrella and stepped into the downpour. She didn't know his name, his story, or the immense power he wielded. She only knew he was cold. That one simple act of kindness was a pebble tossed into a pond, and the ripples would soon return as a tidal wave set to either save her or drown her completely. The bell above the door of the Corner Spoon was the soundtrack to Imogen's life. It jingled when a customer came in, a cheerful, almost mocking sound that promised a brief flurry of activity before settling back into the monotonous hum of the drink cooler and the low grumble of Frank, the owner, complaining about the price of bacon. Tonight the bell was silent. The only customers were two regulars nursing their coffees and staring out at the sheets of rain lashing against the plate glass window. The water ran in rivulets down the glass, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of bleeding streetlights and dark, hurried shapes. "Looks like the sky's finally decided to empty itself on us." Frank grunted from behind the counter, wiping a glass that was already clean. He was a man built like a retired wrestler, with a face that looked permanently disappointed in the weather, the government, and the general state of humanity. But Imogen knew that beneath the gruff exterior was a man who'd once let her slide on rent for the tiny apartment above the diner when her mother had fallen ill. "Keeps the riff-raff out, I guess," said Brenda, Imogen's fellow waitress, as she scrolled listlessly through her phone from her perch on a stool. Brenda's optimism had died somewhere around 2015, and she treated every shift as a personal insult. And the tippers? Imogen didn't respond. She was staring out the window, her gaze fixed on the bus stop across the street. A man stood there, completely unprotected from the deluge. He wasn't a young man, maybe in his late 50s, with graying temples and a face etched with a kind of weary resignation. He wore a simple dark wool coat that was now soaked through, clinging to his frame and making him look smaller, more vulnerable. He wasn't trying to hail a cab or run for better cover. He just stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, taking the full force of the storm as if it were a punishment he deserved. "Look at that poor guy," Imogen murmured more to herself than to anyone else. Brenda glanced up from her phone, her expression a perfect mixture of disinterest and disdain. Some soaked rat. Probably missed the last bus. Not our problem. She went back to her screen, but it became Imogen's problem. She couldn't shake the image of him. There was something in his posture, a profound stillness in the midst of the chaos that resonated with her. It was the same stillness she felt sometimes late at night, when she'd look at the pile of bills on her small kitchen table and the rejection letters from banks for a small business loan. The dream of her own bistro, Carroway's Place, felt as distant as a star on this cloudy, unforgiving night. Her shift was over. The clock on the wall read 10:05 p.m. "All right, Frank, I'm heading out," she said, untying the knot on her stained white apron. "You got your umbrella?" "It's a real gully washer out there," he said, his voice softening a fraction, the way it always did when he spoke to her directly. "Got it right here." She held up the cheap, floral-patterned umbrella she'd bought from a street vendor for $5. It had a dodgy spoke that threatened to collapse at any moment, but it was hers. She pulled on her thin jacket, said good night, and pushed the door open. The wind immediately attacked her, whipping the cold, wet air into her face. The roar of the storm was immense. She fumbled with her umbrella, wrestling it open as it tried to invert itself. Shielded, she started her walk home, a 3-block journey that felt like a mile on nights like this. But her feet stopped. She looked across the street again. The man was still there. A car sped past, sending a tidal wave of gutter water splashing onto the sidewalk, drenching him from the knees down. He didn't even flinch. "It's not your problem," Brenda's voice echoed in her head. "Just go home. You're tired. You're cold." But her mother's voice was there too, a warmer, gentler echo from her childhood. "Imogen, you never know what battle someone is fighting. A little kindness costs you nothing." With a sigh that turned into a plume of white in the cold air, Imogen made her decision. She clutched her purse, took a deep breath, and darted across the street, dodging traffic. The horns that blared at her were lost in the sound of the rain. She reached the bus stop, her sneakers squelching. The man looked up as she approached, his eyes startlingly clear and intelligent, though clouded with a deep, impenetrable sadness. They were the kind of eyes that had seen and processed a great deal, and had decided most of it wasn't good. "Excuse me," Imogen said, her voice barely audible over the storm. She had to shout. "Sir." He seemed surprised that she was talking to him. "Yes." His voice was quiet, raspy. "My apartment is just a block that way," she said, pointing down the street. "You're soaked to the bone. Please take my umbrella." He stared at the flimsy, floral umbrella as if it were a foreign object. Then his gaze shifted back to her face, studying her with an unnerving intensity. "And how will you get home? I'll run. I'm not far. It's okay, really." He continued to stare, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he would refuse that this was a mistake. She felt a flush of embarrassment. Here she was, a waitress in a cheap coat, offering her broken umbrella to a complete stranger who was probably just waiting for his private car. But then a flicker of something changed in his eyes. A hardness seemed to melt just for a second. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice low and serious. The question caught her off guard. Because it's a horrible night to be standing in the rain." It was the only answer she had. He was silent for another long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took the umbrella from her hand. His fingers were icy cold. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried an unexpected weight. "Stay warm," Imogen said, giving him a small, uncertain smile. And then she did what she said she would do. She clutched her purse to her chest, ducked her head against the driving rain, and ran. The cold water hit her instantly, plastering her hair to her scalp and seeping through her jacket. By the time she reached the door of her building, she was as soaked as he had been. As she fumbled for her keys, shivering, she risked one last look back. The man was still there, standing under her ridiculous flowery umbrella. He wasn't looking for a bus anymore. He was just watching her. The next morning, the world felt washed clean. The rain had stopped, leaving behind glistening streets and a sky the color of a pale pearl. Imogen, however, felt anything but clean. She had spent the night shivering, and now a cold was settling deep in her bones. Every muscle ached, a dull, throbbing reminder of her sprint through the storm. Work was as usual a grind. The post-storm Wednesday brought in a rush of customers eager for hot coffee and greasy breakfasts. Imogen ran on autopilot, her movements a blur of pouring coffee, scribbling orders, and delivering plates of pancakes and eggs. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man at the bus stop. Who was he? Why had he looked so utterly lost? She felt a pang of regret for not asking if he needed more help, but then chided herself. She'd done what she could. She'd probably never see him or her $5 umbrella again. "You look like death warmed over," Brenda commented, as they crossed paths by the coffee machine. "Let me guess you ran home in that downpour, didn't you, after giving your umbrella to that bum?" Imogen just shook her head, too tired to argue. "He wasn't a bum, Brenda." "Right. He was a secret millionaire, just testing the kindness of the common folk. Get real, Imogen. You're too nice. It's going to get you nowhere but sick and poor." The words stung, mostly because they felt true. Her kindness hadn't paid her rent or gotten her any closer to her dream. It had just gotten her a head cold and a long, sleepless night. The lunch rush was just starting to taper off when the black car pulled up outside. It wasn't just any car. It was a sleek, dark Mercedes sedan, the kind that whispered of old money and silent, powerful decisions being made in rooms she couldn't imagine. It gleamed in the afternoon sun, looking utterly out of place in front of their greasy spoon diner. Frank peered over the counter. "Well, look at that. Someone's lost." The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was the polar opposite of the car's understated elegance. Dressed in a sharply tailored grey suit with a severe haircut and glasses perched on her nose, she radiated an aura of crisp, no-nonsense efficiency. She scanned the front of the diner, her lips pressed into a thin, unsmiling line before walking purposefully to the door. The bell jingled. The entire diner seemed to fall silent. All eyes were on the woman as she stepped inside her expensive-looking heels, clicking on the worn linoleum floor. Her gaze swept the room, dismissive and quick, until it landed on Imogen, who was clearing a table in the back. The woman walked directly toward her, weaving through the tables with an unnerving grace. "Are you Imogen Carroway?" she asked. Her voice was as sharp and clipped as her suit. Imogen froze a half-eaten slice of toast in her hand. Had she done something wrong? Was she in some kind of trouble? Her mind raced. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Miss Davies," the woman stated, not offering a hand to shake. "I am the executive assistant to Mr. Griffith Cole. He has requested to see you." The name meant nothing to Imogen. Griffith Cole. "I'm sorry I don't know anyone by that name." Miss Davies's expression didn't change. "He believes you do. He sent me to fetch you. He would like a word. The car is waiting." Imogen's heart started to beat a little faster. Fetch her, like she was a parcel to be collected. The whole situation felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. Frank was watching from behind the counter, his brow furrowed with concern. Brenda was unabashedly staring, her mouth slightly agape. I'm in the middle of my shift," Imogen stammered, gesturing vaguely at the diner around her. "Your employer has already been compensated for the inconvenience of your absence, miss," Davies said, glancing towards Frank, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She had clearly spoken to him on her way in. The efficiency was terrifying. "But what is this about?" Imogen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Miss Davies finally allowed a sliver of something that wasn't pure business to enter her tone. It was a faint, clinical curiosity. "It's about an umbrella," she said. "A floral-patterned umbrella, to be precise. Now, if you'll come with me." The diner was dead silent. An umbrella. Her umbrella. It couldn't be. The man from the bus stop. Imogen looked at Frank, who gave her another nod, this one more reassuring. "Go on," it seemed to say. "Find out." Feeling as though she were moving through a dream, Imogen wiped her hands on her apron, untied it, and laid it on the table. She followed Miss Davies out of the diner, the bell jingling her departure. The warm, familiar smell of coffee and bacon was replaced by the cold, sterile scent of expensive leather as the car door was opened for her. As the heavy door thudded shut, sealing her inside the silent, plush interior, Imogen felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was just a waitress from the corner spoon. What was she doing in a car like this? Where was she going, and who on earth was Griffith Cole? The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the diner and everything familiar behind. Brenda's cynical words echoed in her mind. He was a secret millionaire, just testing the kindness of the common folk. The thought was so absurd, so outlandish, that Imogen almost laughed. But as the car sped towards the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Portland, a knot of dread and wild, unbelievable hope tightened in her stomach. The drive was silent and unnervingly smooth. Imogen stared out the tinted windows as the familiar gritty neighborhoods gave way to the pristine, glass and steel canyons of the city's financial district. They pulled into a private underground garage beneath a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. Ms. Davies led her to a private elevator, which ascended with a silent, gut-dropping swiftness. The numbers climbed past 30, then 40, finally stopping at 50. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling office that looked more like a luxury penthouse. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire city, the Willamette River, a silver ribbon winding through it. The furniture was minimalist and modern, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. The air itself felt different up here, thin, still, and charged with power. And there, standing by the window with his back to them, was the man from the bus stop. He was no longer the shivering, defeated figure from the previous night. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark grey suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, and his posture radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He turned around slowly, and his eyes, the same clear, intelligent eyes from the night before, met hers. The deep sadness was still there, but it was now banked like embers glowing under a layer of ash. In this context, he looked less like a man beaten by a storm and more like a king surveying his kingdom. "Miss Carroway," he said, his voice no longer raspy, but a smooth, low baritone that commanded attention. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to one of 2 leather chairs positioned in front of a massive mahogany desk. Imogen's cheap, worn-out sneakers felt sacrilegious on the plush, cream-colored carpet. She sat down stiffly on the edge of the chair. Ms. Davies remained standing, a silent sentinel by the door. "My name is Griffith Cole," he said, sitting in the other chair facing her. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I apologize for the dramatic summons. I find it's the most efficient way to cut through formalities." You're the man from the bus stop," Imogen said, the words coming out as a whisper. "I am," he confirmed. He reached down beside his chair and produced her umbrella. It was closed, but she could see the familiar, faded floral pattern. It looked absurdly out of place in this temple of wealth. "I believe this belongs to you." "You can keep it," she said quickly. "It was just an umbrella." "No," he said, his gaze intense. "It wasn't. To you, perhaps, it was just an umbrella. To me, it was a data point, an anomaly in a world that operates on predictable patterns of self-interest." Imogen stared at him, completely bewildered. "A data point. I own Cole Properties." He explained, a hint of weariness in his tone. "We buy, sell, and develop real estate. It's a business that often requires me to gauge the character of a neighborhood of its people. I frequently conduct my own field research. I walk the streets. I observe. Last night I was observing the effects of a recent, rather hostile acquisition my company made in your neighborhood." The storm was an unexpected variable. He paused, letting the information sink in. Imogen's mind was reeling. A real estate mogul, not just a millionaire, but a titan of industry. For 37 minutes, he continued, his voice precise. "I stood at that bus stop, Dozens of people walked past. Dozens of cars drove by. Not a single person stopped. Not one offered a word, let alone shelter. They saw a wet, cold man and decided, as your colleague so astutely put it this morning, that it was not their problem. Imogen flinched. How did he know what Brenda had said? Had he bugged the diner? Griffith saw the flash of alarm on her face. My assistant is very thorough. She made inquiries at the diner before fetching you. It seems you are well regarded while your co-worker is less so. He leaned back in his chair. You, Miss Carroway, were the anomaly. You had finished a long shift. You were tired. You had your own shelter, meager as it was, and yet you crossed the street into the storm to offer it to a stranger, expecting nothing in return. That is a rare quality. Imogen didn't know what to say. She just sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I have a proposition for you, he said, his tone shifting from analytical to direct. It's why you're here. As I mentioned, my company recently acquired a property a few blocks from your diner. It's a commercial space. A restaurant, actually. It was called the Gilded Spoon, a rather unfortunate name for a place that was failing miserably. The previous owners ran it into the ground. He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up a thick folder. He slid it across the polished surface towards her. I am offering you that restaurant. Imogen's breath caught in her throat. Offering me? What do you mean? I mean I will hand you the keys, he said plainly. I will cover the lease for the first 6 months. I will provide a $50,000 line of credit for startup costs, inventory, utilities, staffing. You will have full operational control. You can rename it, redecorate it, create your own menu. You can turn it into the bistro you've been dreaming of. The world tilted on its axis. How did he know about her bistro, her dream? Ms. Davies's thorough inquiries, she supposed. The thought of this man's team dissecting her life, her hopes, was deeply unsettling. Why she finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. Why would you do this for me, for an umbrella? Because I am not in the business of running restaurants. Ms. Carroway, I am in the business of investing in assets with potential. I believe character is the most valuable and undervalued asset in the world. I am making an investment in your character. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. However, it is not a gift. It is an offer, a test. You have 90 days. 3 months to make the restaurant profitable. If at the end of those 90 days the business is in the black, I will sign the building over to you, free and clear. It will be yours. If it is not you, walk away, no debt incurred, and I will sell the property to the highest bidder. He let the terms hang in the air, each word, a weight, a promise, a threat. It was impossible. A dream. A fairy tale concocted by a tired waitress's mind. But the thick folder on the desk was real. The view from the window was real. Griffith Cole was real. Her dream, Carroway's place, was being handed to her on a silver platter. But the platter felt heavy, and the man offering it had eyes that held no warmth, only calculation. It was an unbelievable offer, born from an unbelievable night. And as she sat there on the 50th floor, high above the city, where she had felt so small, Imogen had to decide if she was ready to accept a dream that came with such terrifying strings attached. Imogen left the skyscraper in a daze, clutching the heavy folder to her chest as if it were a life raft. The world outside seemed impossibly loud and vibrant after the sepulchral silence of Griffith Cole's office. She didn't take a cab. She walked her feet, carrying her aimlessly through the downtown streets for what felt like hours. A restaurant. Her own restaurant. The idea was so immense, so overwhelmingly wonderful that it brought tears to her eyes. It was the lottery ticket. She'd never bought the prayer she'd never dared to speak aloud. All the years of scrimping and saving, of studying cookbooks under a dim light, after a grueling shift of sketching out menus on napkins, it had all led to this. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, a cold tide of reality washed in. Griffith Cole wasn't a philanthropist. He was a shark, a real estate predator who'd admitted to conducting hostile acquisitions. He hadn't offered her a gift. He'd presented her with a challenge, a high-stakes gamble. An investment in your character. The words echoed in her mind, sounding less like a compliment and more like a clinical assessment. She needed to talk to someone. Not Frank, not yet. He would be practical, maybe even cynical. She needed someone who understood her dreams, who had shared in her late-night worries. She needed Leo. Leo was a freelance graphic designer, a man whose creativity was matched only by his deep-seated distrust of the corporate world. He worked from their tiny cluttered apartment, a space filled with the smell of oil paints and brewing coffee. When Imogen finally arrived home and pushed the door open, he was hunched over his drawing tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, his worried expression softening when he saw her. "Imogen, my God, where have you been?" Frank called. "Said some woman in a suit came and took you. I've been calling your phone." She looked down at her phone. 6 missed calls from him. In her daze, she hadn't even heard it ring. "Leo, you are not going to believe what happened." She sank onto their lumpy sofa and opened the folder, spreading the contents across the coffee table, architectural floor, plans, equipment, inventories, legal documents, and a crisp-bound proposal titled Project Nightingale. As she recounted the story, the man in the rain, the black car, the office in the sky, the unbelievable offer, Leo's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, and then to a deep, unsettling suspicion. He listened patiently, his dark eyes scanning the documents as she spoke. When she finished, breathless and wide-eyed, he didn't share her excitement. He was silent for a long time, just staring at the name on the letterhead, Cole Properties. Griffith Cole. Leo said, his voice flat. "I know that name." He got up and went to his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Imogen watched her heart beginning to pound with a new, unwelcome rhythm of anxiety. "Leo, what is it?" "Just a second," he muttered. He clicked through several links, his face growing darker with each one. Finally, he turned the laptop around to face her. The screen was filled with headlines from the Portland Business Chronicle and local news blogs. Vulture of Burnside Griffith Cole squeezes. Another local landmark dry. Cole Properties Trail of Tears. Beloved bakery becomes luxury condos. The Gilded Spoon closes abruptly following Cole acquisition. Staff and community outraged. The last headline felt like a punch to the gut. She clicked on it. The article was only a week old. It detailed how the Gilded Spoon, a neighborhood institution for over 40 years, had been sold to Cole Properties under immense financial pressure. The long-time owners, an elderly couple named the Whitmans, had been forced to sell. The community had rallied, starting a petition and holding protests. But it was too late. The article quoted a distraught former employee. He didn't even look us in the eye. Just sent his corporate vultures to lock the doors. Threw 20 people out of work without a second thought. That place was our home. Imogen felt sick. The restaurant Griffith Cole was offering her wasn't just some failing business. It was a beloved community hub that he had personally destroyed. The previous owners weren't anonymous figures. They were the Whitmans, a couple who had poured their lives into that place. Imogen. "This is a poisoned chalice," Leo said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Don't you see what this is? He's not a savior. He's using you. Using me for what she asked, her voice shaking. For PR, for cover. He's facing a huge community backlash for what he did. He's seen as a monster who guts local businesses. So what does he do? He finds a local girl, a struggling waitress with a heart of gold, and installs her as the new owner. He turns a story of corporate greed into a heartwarming fairy tale. Hard-working waitress gets her big break from benevolent tycoon. It's brilliant. It's diabolical. Everything clicked into place, the pieces forming a picture that was ugly and cruel. The acquisition he'd been observing in her neighborhood. The community anger. He wasn't investing in her character. He was using it as a shield. She was meant to be the friendly, smiling face that would make everyone forget about the Whitmans and the 20 employees who lost their jobs. He set me up. She whispered the enormity of it crashing down on her. If I succeed, he's a hero. If I fail, if you fail, Leo finished for her. It proves his point. It proves the business was already dead and that he was right to shut it down. He gets to sell the property without any more public outcry. Either way, he wins. You're just a pawn in his game, Imogen. The beautiful dream shattered, leaving behind sharp, painful shards. The offer on the 50th floor wasn't a ladder to the heavens. It was the entrance to a labyrinth, and at its center was a man who saw people not as souls, but as assets to be leveraged. She looked at the documents, spread across their coffee table. The keys to her dream were right there, but they were tainted. Taking them meant becoming a part of Griffith Cole's ruthless strategy. It meant building her future on the rubble of someone else's. Tears of anger and disappointment welled in her eyes. The unbelievable offer had become an impossible choice. She could refuse and remain a waitress at the Corner Spoon, her dream forever locked away. Or she could accept and step into a moral minefield, becoming the public face for a man who represented everything she and Leo despised. For 2 days, Imogen existed in a state of suspended animation. She went to work. She smiled at customers. She refilled coffee cups. But her mind was a battlefield. Every spare moment was spent agonizing over the decision. Leo was adamant that she should refuse. Tell him to take his blood money and shove it. He'd said his artist's soul offended by the sheer cynicism of Cole's maneuver. We'll find another way, Imogen. The right way. But what was the right way? Waiting another 10 years, saving pennies, hoping for a miracle that would never come. She was 28. The fire in her belly, the passion for cooking that had sustained her through so much, was beginning to feel like a dwindling ember. This was her chance, perhaps her only one, to fan it back into a flame. It was Frank who unknowingly tipped the scales. On the 3rd day, seeing her distraction and the dark circles under her eyes, he pulled her aside after her shift. "All right, kid, spill it," he said, his voice gruff but his eyes kind. "Ever since that fancy car showed up, you've been walking around like a ghost. What did that suit want?" So she told him. She told him everything: the offer, the restaurant, Griffith Cole, and the ugly truth Leo had uncovered about the Gilded Spoon. She expected him to agree with Leo to warn her away from the corporate shark. Instead, Frank was quiet for a long time, wiping down the clean counter with a damp rag. "So the man's a bastard," he finally said, not looking at her. "Most men with that much money are. The world ain't a fairy tale, Imogen. You don't get handed a castle without a dragon guarding it." He finally stopped wiping and met her gaze. "Question is, are you going to let the dragon scare you off, or are you going to figure out a way to tame it?" "But it feels wrong, Frank. Taking over a place that meant so much to people, working for a man like him." "Who said you have to work for him?" Frank countered. "He's giving you the keys. He's giving you the money. He said you have full control. So control it. Make it yours. Honor the old place instead of erasing it. You think those 20 people who lost their jobs would rather see the place stay shuttered and get turned into a vape shop, or see it reopened by someone with a good heart who might even hire a few of them back?" His words cut through her confusion with the sharp clarity of common sense. She had been so focused on Cole's motivations that she hadn't considered her own power in the situation. She wasn't just a pawn. She was a player, and she could choose how to move. That night, she told Leo her decision. "I'm going to do it." He was disappointed and a little hurt. "Imogen, you're making a deal with the devil." Maybe, she replied, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. "But maybe the devil is giving me a chance to build a little piece of heaven. I can't walk away from that, Leo. I have to try." The argument that followed was tense, leaving a cold distance between them, but her mind was made up. The next morning she called Miss Davies. "I accept," she said, her voice steady. The transition was ruthlessly efficient. Within 48 hours, Imogen had signed a mountain of paperwork, been given a corporate credit card, and stood, keys in hand, in front of her new reality. The former gilded spoon was beautiful and heartbreaking. It had good bones, exposed brick walls, a long polished oak bar, and large windows that flooded the space with light. But it was also a ghost. Chairs were still overturned on tables, a dusty menu board advertised last week's specials, and a child's forgotten crayon lay on the floor. It felt like a crime scene. Her first day was a brutal awakening. She'd put up a small, handwritten sign in the window, "Under new management. Opening soon. Please give us a chance." The reaction was immediate and hostile. An elderly woman walking her dog stopped, read the sign, and spat on the sidewalk in front of the door. A group of teenagers scrawled "corporate sellout" in soap on the window. The hostility wasn't just outside. She called a meeting with the former staff, whose contact information Ms. Davies had begrudgingly provided. Only 5 of the original 20 showed up. They gathered in the dusty dining room, their arms crossed their faces, a mixture of suspicion and despair. A fiery redhead named Maria, the former head waitress, acted as their spokesperson. "So you're the one," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The one Cole picked to put a pretty face on his dirty work. You have any idea what he did to the Whitmans? He bled them dry, forced them out of the home they built for 40 years. "I know it looks bad," Imogen started, her voice faltering under their collective glare. "But I want to do this differently. I want to create a place for this community. I want to offer you your jobs back." A bitter laugh came from a man who introduced himself as Carlos, the former line cook. "And work for him, for the man who threw us on the street." "No thanks. We'd rather have our dignity." "You wouldn't be working for him," Imogen insisted, her desperation growing. "You'd be working with me. We could make this place ours. We could name it the New Spoon, or Whitman's Corner, to honor them." "Don't you dare use their name," Maria snapped, her eyes flashing. "You're not one of us. You're just the replacement, and we want no part of it." They stood up and walked out, leaving Imogen alone in the silent, cavernous room. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, suffocating her. The community hated her. The staff rejected her. Leo was distant and cold. She had walked away from the safety of the corner spoon and straight into the fire, and now she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The 90-day clock had started ticking, and she hadn't even survived day 1. The first month was a special kind of hell. Imogen worked 18-hour days, fueled by caffeine and sheer stubborn desperation. She scrubbed floors, painted walls, and wrestled with vendors who were reluctant to extend credit to a business associated with Griffith Cole. She managed to hire a skeleton crew, a culinary student who needed the experience, and a retired bus boy who didn't care about neighborhood politics, but it wasn't enough. The restaurant, which she had tentatively named The Hearth, was a morgue. Locals actively boycotted it. The few customers she got were curious out-of-towners who wandered in by mistake. The $50,000 line of credit was draining at an alarming rate. Night after night, she would stare at the dismal sales figures, the red ink a testament to her failure. Leo tried to be supportive, but his skepticism was a tangible presence between them. "Maybe it's time to cut your losses, Imogen," he'd suggest gently. "You can't force people to like you." Every word felt like a betrayal. The lowest point came on a Friday night 6 weeks in. She had exactly 3 tables occupied. Outside, a small, quiet protest had formed, organized by Maria, the former head waitress. They weren't shouting. They were just standing there with signs that read, "Honor the Whitmans and community, not corporations." Their silent vigil was more damning than any angry mob. Defeated Imogen went into the back office, a tiny windowless room, and sank into the rickety chair. She pulled out the ledger. The numbers were catastrophic. She was on track to lose thousands by the end of the 90-day period. Griffith Cole would win. The community would feel vindicated in their hatred of her. She had failed. Tears of frustration streamed down her face. She had been so arrogant, so naive to think she could tame the dragon. The dragon had swallowed her whole. Just as she was about to close the ledger and surrender, the door to the office opened. Griffith Cole stood there. He looked around the small, shabby office, then at the tear-streaked face of his investment. He showed no sympathy. His expression was as cool and analytical as it had been in his skyscraper office. "Not going as planned?" "Miss Carroway?" he asked, his voice calm. All the frustration, the anger, the fear, and the exhaustion that had been simmering inside Imogen for weeks finally boiled over. She shot to her feet. "What did you expect?" She spat, her voice raw with fury. "Did you think I could just waltz in here, and everyone would forget what you did? You destroyed this place. You ripped the heart out of this community, and then you threw me in here to clean up your mess. You set me up to fail from the very beginning." She was shouting now, her fists clenched. Was this the test to see how long I'd last before I broke? "Are you enjoying the show? Mr. Cole is my failure, a satisfying data point for you." He didn't flinch at her outburst. He simply stood there, absorbing her rage. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, he spoke, his voice quiet but intense. "You think this is about you," he said, stepping further into the room. "You think this multi-million-dollar property, this investment of my time and capital, is about a test of a waitress I met on a Tuesday. Your ego is more robust than your business acumen, Ms. Carroway." The insult stung, but he wasn't finished. "I didn't tell you the whole story," he said, his gaze shifting to a point somewhere over her shoulder, as if looking at a ghost. "I didn't tell you why I bought this specific restaurant." He walked over to the wall, where a single, faded photograph of the original restaurant staff from the 1980s was still hanging. Imogen had left it there out of respect. He stared at it. "My wife Eleanor passed away 3 years ago," he said, his voice losing its hard edge, becoming softer, heavier. She was not born into money. Her parents were immigrants. She worked her way through college as a waitress. Right here, in this building. It was called the Canary Cage back then. He pointed to a young woman in the photograph, a girl with a bright, hopeful smile and kind eyes. That's her. She loved this place. She said it was the first place where she felt like she belonged in this country. It's where I met her. I was a struggling law student, and I used to come in for coffee I couldn't afford just to see her smile. Imogen stared at the picture, her anger dissolving into stunned silence. When I heard the Whitmans were in trouble, I bought the property. He continued, his back still to her. I did it to preserve her memory. I thought I could just own it, keep it safe. But a building isn't a memory. It's just bricks and mortar. It needs a soul, and I have no idea how to give it one. I am good at acquiring things, Miss Carroway. I am terrible at nurturing them. He finally turned to face her. The impenetrable mask was gone. In its place was the man from the bus stop, vulnerable, sad, and lost. The night I met you, he said I had just come from a meeting with my board. They were pushing me to sell this land to a developer who wants to build a parking garage. I walked out. I just walked for miles, thinking about Eleanor, about how I was failing her memory. And then the storm hit. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a predator, but a man drowning in grief. When you crossed the street with that absurd umbrella, you didn't see a potential business opportunity. You didn't see a man who could help you. You just saw a person in the cold. You acted with the kind of simple, uncalculated decency that Eleanor embodied, the decency I seem to have lost along the way. This wasn't a test to see if you could be a successful businesswoman in 90 days, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This was a desperate last-ditch effort to see if someone with the right character, someone with her kind of spirit, could make this place live again. I wasn't testing you. I was testing a hypothesis. I was testing if kindness still has a place in this world. And you, he said, his voice, cracking slightly, have been failing the test. Imogen was speechless. You've been trying to run a business, he said, his voice regaining its strength. You need to do more than that. You need to build a home, just like she did. Stop trying to win over the community and start trying to be the community. Stop fighting the ghost of this place and start listening to it. He walked to the door and paused. The 90-day clock is suspended. The line of credit is now unlimited. My personal mentorship, for what it's worth, is at your disposal. Now stop crying in your office and go save my wife's restaurant. He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Imogen in the silence the entire world remade. Griffith Cole's revelation changed everything. It was as if a key had turned in a lock she didn't even know existed, opening a door to a new way of seeing her task. She wasn't an invader. She was a custodian. She wasn't a businesswoman trying to turn a profit. She was a chef, trying to breathe life back into a place filled with memories not just for Griffith, but for the whole neighborhood. Armed with this new purpose, she completely changed her strategy. The next morning she took down the hearth sign. She walked out to the small group of protesters who eyed her with their usual hostility. Maria stood at the front, her arms crossed. Instead of avoiding them, Imogen walked right up to them. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I've been doing this all wrong. I was so focused on my dream that I completely disrespected yours. And I disrespected the memory of the Whitmans." She looked directly at Maria. "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for your help. I don't want to erase the gilded spoon. I want to honor it. But I can't do that without the people who made it what it was. I can't do it without you." She then told them a carefully edited version of the story. She didn't mention Griffith's wife, that was his private grief to share, but she explained that the new owner had deep personal ties to the building and wanted to see it thrive as a community hub again, not as a corporate clone. "I am not the enemy," Imogen said, her heart pounding. "The enemy is an empty building and a parking garage. Help me fight that." Maria and the others were silent, stunned by her directness and humility. There were no immediate promises, no hugs, no instant resolution. But when Imogen walked away, she felt a subtle shift in the air. The wall of animosity had developed a crack. That afternoon, she found the Whitmans' home address. With a basket of fresh bread she'd baked that morning and a heart full of terror, she knocked on their door. A kind-faced woman with flour on her apron opened it. It was Mrs. Whitman. Imogen spent 2 hours in their cozy living room, listening to their stories about the restaurant, about their favorite customers, about the dishes that had been on the menu for 40 years. She didn't just offer them sympathy, she offered them a partnership. She asked if they would be willing to consult on the new menu, to share their recipes for beloved classics, like their clam chowder and apple pie. She offered to name the restaurant The Whitman in their honor. By the time she left, Mrs. Whitman had tears in her eyes and had promised to give her the recipe for the chowder. The changes started to ripple outwards. With the unlimited line of credit, Imogen sought out Maria Carlos and the other former staff. She offered them their jobs back, not at their old pay, but with a raise and a profit-sharing plan. She showed them the new concept, a restaurant that was a blend of the old and the new. It would be called The Whitman. The menu would feature their classic comfort food, alongside some of Imogen's own more modern creations. This time, Maria and Carlos said yes, and they brought the others with them. The restaurant became a hive of activity, but this time it was filled with energy and hope. Leo, seeing the profound change in Imogen and understanding her new mission, became her biggest supporter. He designed a beautiful new logo for the Whitman one that incorporated a spoon into a stylized W. He spent his weekends helping her paint and sand floors. The cold distance between them melted away, replaced by the warmth of a shared purpose. Griffith Cole was true to his word. He became a silent mentor. He never came into the restaurant during the renovation, but he would call her once a week. He wouldn't tell her what to do, but he would ask sharp, insightful questions that forced her to think critically about every choice, from the cost of linens to the psychology of menu design. He was teaching her how to be a leader, not just a chef. 3 months after Imogen had first walked into the fire, the Whitman held its grand reopening. The sign Leo designed glowed warmly above the door. Inside the space was vibrant and full. The entire community, it seemed, had turned out. The Whitmans were sitting at the best table in the house, holding court as guest of honor. Frank from the corner spoon was at the bar, beaming with pride. Imogen, in her chef's whites, moved through the dining room, a room filled with the buzz of happy conversation and the clinking of glasses. Maria was running the floor with an expert's grace. Carlos was commanding the kitchen, churning out plates of his famous chowder. It was a symphony of redemption. Later in the evening, she saw him. Griffith Cole was sitting alone in a quiet corner booth, the same one he'd probably sat in as a young law student decades ago. He wasn't dressed as a titan of industry, but in a simple sweater, looking like just another customer. He was just watching the room, a small, sad but genuine smile on his face. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of gratitude, of respect, of shared understanding. Imogen knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. There would be good nights and bad nights, financial struggles and triumphs. But as she looked at the thriving, happy space she had built, not on a ruthless deal, but on empathy, respect, and a stranger's hidden grief, she knew she had done more than open a restaurant. She had given a building its soul back, and in doing so, she had finally truly found her own. Imogen's story isn't just about a lucky break or a secret millionaire. It's a powerful reminder that the smallest gestures, the ones we make when no one is watching, can have the most profound impact. An umbrella shared in a storm did more than keep a man dry. It opened a door to a forgotten history, healed a community's wound, and gave a woman's dream an unexpected and beautiful soul. It shows us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in character, and that the greatest investments we can ever make are in each other. Sometimes the most unbelievable offers in life don't come from a place of power, but from a moment of simple human kindness. If Imogen's incredible journey from a tired waitress to a community champion touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds never go unnoticed. And for more real-life stories that inspire and move, you make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Thank you for listening.